think we ought to start with what's been happening in San Bernardino, this unspeakable tragedy. There's a lot of debate around it, but first your thoughts just in the hours after.
Well, it is an unspeakable tragedy, and despite the headline in the daily news, the first thing I did was say a prayer. Say a prayer for those who've been murdered, say a prayer for their families, say a prayer for those who are trying to recover, and say a prayer especially as well for our first responders. And then we need to ask some tough questions. You know, it was several weeks ago before Paris when our FBI director said the FBI was, quote, overwhelmed by the number of suspected Islamic terrorists in this country that they cannot keep track of. And honestly, the facts of this case are disturbing, to say the very least.
And they're not ruling out terrorism, but there are certainly strains that are leading to potentially narrative here. The other big discussion that is coming out of this is not just this incident, but another one in Savannah yesterday, another mass shooting, that they're becoming a daily incidence. And whether it's mental health or terrorism, the one common strain is guns. And we've had a couple of Republicans on this morning who don't seem to think that there's much that we can do. Are you along those lines?
Well, I think one of the things we should be doing, and we're clearly not doing, is prosecuting those people who shouldn't have guns. I mean, we have lists and lists of people who shouldn't own guns who have them, and they're not prosecuted. Less than 1% of them are ever prosecuted. We have loads of guns that are illegally owned in this country. Why don't we prosecute them? I think people would be willing to do more if some basic common sense steps were taken. We don't enforce the laws in this country. That's why some of the cities and states with the most stringent gun control laws also have mass shootings. Remember South Carolina? The FBI admits that the guy never should have been sold a gun. South Carolina has some of the most stringent gun control laws in the country, and yes, yet a mass shooting occurred. So I actually think it's ideology, not common sense, that causes the left wing every time in a knee-jerk reaction to say the answer here is more laws when we're not enforcing the laws we have. Let's start by enforcing the laws we have.
But wouldn't it be common sense to have people who are on terror watch lists not be allowed to buy? I mean, there are common sense things that we can do.
Yes, but that's kind of a red herring, honestly. If somebody is a suspected terrorist on a watch list, they can be indicted at any time. And once you're indicted, you cannot own a firearm. So let's enforce the laws we have. Let's start with that. I honestly think this is part of why people are losing faith in their government,
but if you're on the
losing faith in their political
watch list, you can't get on a plane, but you can buy 223?
Well, you know, my best friend's husband was on the watch list for years. It was a complete mistake. He also happened to be a gun owner. If I had utter faith in the competence of government, I might agree with that. But do you? I don't. The government screws up all the time. They screw up who they put on watch lists. They screw up, my goodness, there are litanies of things. Government makes mistakes over.
The government
but if someone is a terrorist suspect,
do you throw out
they
the
can be indicted.
But do you throw out the baby with the bathwater, where you're saying because they screw up in 1 or 2% on the terror watch list, and I would suspect your friend on the terror watch list, if he went in to buy a gun or she went in to buy a gun and wasn't able to buy a gun, at that point would appeal being on the terror watch list.
Really?
But isn't it worth it? Isn't it worth for the 97 or 98%? You talk about a red herring, Carly. This, with all due respect, this is a red herring to suggest that we should not have background checks for people on terror watch lists.
You know what I think is a red herring? It's a red herring. If someone is a suspected terrorist, they can be indicted. Why aren't they? If someone illegally owns a gun, they can be prosecuted. Why aren't they?
Right.
Let us start with those common sense things, because it's not happening today. Here we're talking about a mass shooting, a tragedy that has all the earmarks of a new phase in Islamic terrorism here at home.
Right.
And what are we spending our time talking about? Driven by President Obama, Hillary Clinton, and the rest of the liberals, is gun control.
Not driven by President Obama. I've been critical of President Obama for going out while there was an active shooter attacking. I'm a Republican that had, I think, a 100% rating with the NRA. NRA.
Well, no more, I guess,
that
Joe.
looks at, well, yeah, you know what? Probably not if we want to make sure that terrorists can go into gun shows and get as many guns as they want to get and get as military-style assault weapons. Perhaps if the NRA doesn't rate me 100%, perhaps that's more of a problem with how the NRA's values have changed than how my values have changed.
Okay, and maybe we just disagree on this, but if you listen to your reporter earlier, what he said was that the ATF believes that someone purchased this gun on behalf of the police department, and somehow that gun ended up in the hands of this guy. So it actually doesn't sound at all like this man purchased a firearm.
And let me say also, for people watching, chances are probably pretty good. Carly and I agree 99% of the time.
Yes, we do.
On the Second Amendment, issues. But there are some things I think Republicans need to do. Let's move on to the campaign, because we only have so much time. Also, Mika wants to get your husband up here so she can flirt with him.
I know. Frank loves Mika. Mika loves Frank.
Yeah, exactly. And now Mika's found out that he was once profiled in tow times.
Tow times.
And so now that's TOW time.
TOW times for all those truck drivers out there.
Let's talk generally about the campaign. I want to ask you about your frustration about Donald Trump. It seems like a fair thing because Chris Christie's now striking out against the media, but Donald Trump says very outrageous things.
Yeah, and the media falls for it every time. The media falls for it every time.
Well, but how does the media respond when he talks about, let's say, something occurring in New Jersey that 99% of Americans say never occurred?
Yeah, well, the media shows it over and over and over again. This is what Donald Trump does. By the way, it's good for his ratings. He's an entertainer. It's not what a leader does. Here's his pattern. He says something outrageous. The media follows it. Then generally he says somehow we misunderstood him. We misunderstood him making fun of the New York Times reporter. We misunderstood him insulting conservative women who disagree or challenge with him.
Right.
Challenge him. That's a pattern of an entertainer. It's not the pattern of a leader. And the pattern that I see is a man who seems to only feel big when he's trying to make other people look small. And I think it makes Donald Trump look the smallest of all.
So let's talk about your campaign. You had a big surge after the first two debates. We haven't heard quite as much. A lot of campaigns still to go before the first caucus.
Yeah, we're sort of at the end of the beginning.
End of the beginning. Talk about the state of your campaign, and what would you say to people that said, wow, she was really hot for a month or so, and we haven't heard as much from her over the past month. What have you been doing? How's the campaign going? What do you expect over the next month?
Yeah, well, first let me say that the only reason we're spending so much time obsessing over national polls is because they tend to determine, thanks to the RNC, who's on the main debate stage. And I'm on the main debate stage. I wasn't on it in August. I had to fight my way on in September, and I'm right on that main debate stage, and that's where I'm going to stay. When an organization like Gallup says they're not going to participate in national horse race polling because it's so flawed, that tells you a lot. I've been out there campaigning every single day. Local media, national media, thanks for having me on this morning. Ground games are out there. We're raising money. I'm going to be left standing when the process of elimination is over. And the process of elimination, frankly, has only just begun. The process of elimination is going to last a while. And then we're going to get down to the process of selection. Yeah. And yours truly will be standing there.
Nick? But how do you break out in a state like New Hampshire, where there are probably 10 or 12 candidates who are making it their must-win state? How do you get in there and say, no, I'm the person you should vote for, especially with, as you point out, Trump sucking up all the oxygen and the attention all the time? How do you break out?
Well, I've been traveling to New Hampshire and meeting the voters there for over a year. When I launched my campaign on May 4th, I was 17 out of 16. I wasn't even asked about in the polls because fewer than 3% of New Hampshire voters had ever heard my name. We're doing just fine in New Hampshire. And I will remind you that in election after election after election, what all the polling data says is people make up their minds in the last 7 to 14 days before a primary. The truth is we're all obsessed with politics, but most people haven't really started paying attention quite yet. They're going to, and when they do, I think I'll do very well in New Hampshire.
You're the most prepared, the most precise, and the best performer in every debate, bar none. Let's bring in someone.
Oh, you're flirting with me now, Mika.
Yeah, she flirts with the whole family.
I think it's a gender issue. I'm serious that it doesn't recognize. Carly's husband.
Mika has said that.
He's been following you on this campaign every step of the way. Frank, you're all dressed up today.
I'm so
all for
happy
you.
to be here.
I've never seen you dressed up.
Carly says that Mika flirts with you every time she sees you. Is that true?
Most of the time.
And now she's found out that when you were a tow truck driver, you were profiled in tow times.
Are you on the
That's
cover?
big time.
Very exciting interview.
Was he really on the cover, Carly?
No,
No.
he just was profiled in Tow Times. Just as
was?
recent. Yes,
I
he
need
did
that.
a
I need
long
that.
interview. Yes,
That's
Tow
hysterical.
Times. It's a coveted magazine at the headquarters in the campaign.
That is
Exactly.
hysterical.
We need to see that. So how's the campaign going from your vantage point?
I think it's going great. I'm very proud of Carly. And, you know, I've learned in 32 years that you never underestimate my wife.
Yeah.
She'll be here at the end, I promise you.
What is the one thing that you'd like voters in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina to know about your wife that they don't know about?
Well, hopefully they're starting to learn the fact that she won't give up. If we're lucky enough that she gets awarded this wonderful job, she'll do the things she's saying. And I've seen her do unbelievable things at HP, at Lucent, at AT&T, at all levels of her career. And she does it by getting everyone involved. I mean, at HP, she wanted, on day one, she wanted to communicate with the janitors all the way up to her direct reports. Oddly enough, they didn't know how to do that. But they quickly figured that out, and she did that through her whole tenure. She always explained to customers, employees, and shareholders what she was trying to accomplish. She solicited their ideas, told them where we were every step along the way, and got them involved. That's what she'll do with the American citizens.
Carly Fiorina and Frank Fiorina. So much.
Thank you guys so much for being here.
Tough day.
Thanks for having me.
It's really
Appreciate
good
it.
to have you both.
Thanks.